Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience in holding. We now have our speakers in conference. Please be aware that each of your lines is in a listen-only mode. It is now my pleasure to turn this conference over to Chris Hund. You may begin.
Thanks, Chantel. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody around the country and around the world. Welcome to the November AHA Team Training Monthly Webinar. This is Chris Hund, Senior Director for the Center for Health Innovation here at the American Hospital Association. And we're really glad to have you here today for Strategies for Staff Engagement, Leading the Low Performer. So thank you all for joining. Just some quick rules of engagement. You can listen to the audio for this webinar in two different ways. You can do so through the phone, and if you do that, please mute your computer speakers. You'll want to go to make sure that they're muted because otherwise you'll get some weird feedback, or you could listen through your computer if you have a solid internet connection. We're going to do a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So the way that we go about doing this is you can chat your questions in the box on screen right now where it says chat. When you chat your questions in, we collect them and we try to turn it into a well-ordered Q&A session at the end. Sometimes we're able to answer those questions as we go too. So feel free to submit those questions on a rolling basis as we go. Just a couple of upcoming events, upcoming announcements from the AHA Team Training Program. You can register for our 2020 Team Steps Master Training courses right now online. You could also register for Fundamentals course and Specialty courses. The Fundamentals course is interesting. It's being put together as a way to either teach just the Team Steps tools without the Master Training course, or to maybe provide some reinforcement for you if you want to hear about the tools again and sit with some Master Trainers again without going through the full 2-day course. We also have Team Steps Next Steps, which is really what you do after you've had some implementation successes and challenges. So all of that's open right now, so check out our schedule and register if you're interested. We also have the December webinar available for registration. It's Introducing Community Conversations in Healthcare to Improve Patient Outcomes with Kurt O'Brien from the University of Washington in Seattle. So that is next month on December 11th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Of course, our big announcement is the 2020 AHA Team Training National Conference. So you can click there to learn more about the conference. That's going to be June 3rd through 5th down in New Orleans, Louisiana. This conference is always something that I look forward to, and I think a lot of people look forward to in the community because it is put together by people who are currently practicing, sharing their best practices, sharing their research, and sharing just activities on how to do things better. It's highly interactive, almost no talking heads speaking at you. It's really something where every single session gives you something actionable to take away and take home with you. So come hang out with us in New Orleans in June. All right, before we start real quick, contact information. If you need to get in touch with us, you can always visit us online or send us an email. We get back to you as soon as possible, usually within a day or so. Of course, with Thanksgiving coming up next week, we might be a little bit delayed, so happy Thanksgiving to everybody. You can also give us a phone call. So now, without further ado, I want to introduce today's presenters. Both of them are from Providence Hood River Hospital in Oregon. You can see their lovely photos here. Makes me very jealous and wanting to be in that beautiful beauty. But we have Jan Brauer, who's the Clinical Education Coordinator at the hospital, and Rhonda Fischer, who's the Trauma Nurse Coordinator. And both of them have been huge supporters of the AHA Team Training and Team Steps movement for years. They have come to our conference multiple times and presented, and are really just a part of the family, and we're big fans of them, and we're really excited that they get to share their knowledge with you. So Jan and Rhonda, tossing it over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much. That sounds great. So I just quickly want to go ahead and give you our objectives for today. So number one, participants will understand the impact of low performance on the team dynamic, and then being able to make that correlation between why that team dynamic is so important, and that's because of its effect on patient safety. Secondly, participants will understand the importance of adjusting their leadership approach in reaching the next generation of team members. And then where we will spend most of our time today is looking at articulating the 5 R's as a strategy for engaging the low performer. Now, we can tell by the questions that people send in with their registration that this is a hot topic, and our 45 minutes or so together won't be able to touch on or solve each issue, but our goal today is to give an overview of the subject and a framework for working through the process with your low performer.
Our goal really is that you would walk away feeling more confident as a leader so that you could say, where am I in this process? What should I do next? What questions should I be asking? And to give yourself a self-check, but also move that low performer back onto the team. So let's click forward. There we go. So let's talk about engagement. Engagement is a goal in every workforce. So it could be clinics, it could be hospitals, it could be, gosh, your local grocery store. This term of engagement is super important. It's really critically important to have all employees at their peak to do the challenging work in healthcare. Our patients are really depending on us that everybody would be leaning in every day at work. So this is how Workplace Performance Solution defines engagement, the elusive force that motivates employees to higher levels of performance. So we've all seen this graph. This is a familiar graph, and it's still true. On every team, there's top performers, average performers, and unfortunately, non-performers or low performers. It's really the challenge of the leader to move that team to improve performance. This job is never, ever finished. So we're going to be talking today about the framework to lead that non-performer back onto the team. But really, phase one is really to cast the vision and gain momentum to higher performance. So in phase one, which we won't be talking about today, it's really to cast this vision for the high and average performers so that they would create momentum, and get the team to drive forward. Momentum and peer pressure are powerful tools to change a culture. So today, we're going to be focusing on phase two. So after you get the momentum and the peer pressure going, what do you do to go back and pick up the non-performers, the low performers, and to move them back onto the team so that everyone is playing? So we can't afford to really allow anyone to opt out of participating in the team. So that's how we're going to spend our time today, is really in this phase two of moving teams forward.
So why is lack of engagement a force that must be reckoned with? Well, again, I just want to point out that it's because it affects the team dynamic, and any threat to the team dynamic is a threat to patient safety. According to a study by Johns Hopkins, medical error is the 3rd leading cause of death in the U.S. alone. Only cancer and heart disease rank higher, and this, of course, is not new news to any of us by now. But the piece that we need to keep persistently in front of us is that 70% of medical errors are attributable to dysfunctional team dynamics. As goes the health of the team, goes the quality of care the patient's going to receive. The dysfunction we permit at our teams is really just an open invitation for medical error. Therefore, it's critically important that we engage every staff member, including the low performer or the late adopter, in order to preserve the team dynamic, because the team dynamic is largely responsible for driving safe outcomes. So there's lots of reasons. This is the dilemma, right? The dilemma is when you have team members who fail to engage. And again, it is definitely impacting the team dynamic. So there's lots of reasons why people fail to engage. Sometimes it's a matter of attitude, right? There are people on every team that their biggest issue is just their give a darn is busted. For others, it may be a matter of square peg, round hole. Their lack of engagement isn't attitude-driven. They're simply miscast. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then certainly disengagement may also occur when a team member finds that their role has just outgrown them. That either because of personal circumstances, a health issue, or an interpersonal stress, or maybe the job itself has just morphed into something that's beyond their skill set or the capacity. And those things are fair, but those are all reasons why we might see lack of engagement.
So the leader's goal is to move the unwilling or perhaps unable from that idea of can't to can to re-engaging. So it's really separating off the apostrophe T off of the attitude or the ability, and then to work through a process to discover where's the breakdown, where's the issue. So it's the leader's job to explore the reason for disengagement and to make a clear invitation to rejoin the team. This invitation is really important. Some of you might be asking, how long do you wait to explore and begin the 5 R's? We'll be talking about that a little bit, but really the recommendation is to get your early and mid adopters into the momentum. That's where your energy needs to start. And then activate this process. To activate the 5 R's, you'll circle back and kind of mop up those who didn't stick. Of course, if there's patient harm, just begin the 5 R's right away. So let's talk about the 5 R's. Rhonda and I have developed this sequential framework so that you can work through the process to get every teammate back on board. It might surprise you who will engage and who you might need to release in the future. But you start with the intention of giving everyone on your team the opportunity to get on board, to move forward with the team in the culture of process improvement, and to move through the process and help them discover what it will take to get them willing to rejoin the team. So let's look at the 5 R's. One is reassure and re-invite this valuable teammate back on board. This is really an important step that you want to start with because you're not really sure where the team breakdown is. Number 2, readjust your leadership approach. Rhonda and I will go through a couple different ideas about how you can readjust, how you talk to them, but really it's giving them a second chance to get on board with the train moving forward. Then number 3, reset clear expectations for their performance, for their team engagement, for their teamwork. Redeploy is number 4, redeploy towards their strengths. And we'll take some time there. And then finally, it may be that eventually you need to release a late adopter to be successful elsewhere. So let's start with number 1. Start with reassuring. So reassure that teammate that you're inviting them to engage with the team. This is really an important first step to getting them back on board. You might not know why they're disengaged, and to be honest, they might not know either. I've really been working in my own leadership journey about the power of a great question. A great question helps staff explore why they're disengaged. This is super important with the millennial workforce. The millennials prefer to explore their own solution, and they really resist being told what to do. So the power of the question really applies to the millennial, which is the bulk of our workforce now, about switching that and to put the responsibility for engagement onto their own shoulders. They have a lot of skill and talent, but perhaps not the experience to know how important it is to operate as a team, or that things aren't just optional. So be a curious leader. Help your employees step back and discover their points of resistance. And what's it going to take to get them moving forward on track with the team? Be strategic about your questions so your valuable employee can self-discover the path back to engagement. This might seem like a lot of work. I've heard from managers about like, gosh, really? Do I have to do this work? Well, actually, it's just asking great questions so that they do the work. Mm-hmm. So what you might already know their answer, having them self-discover really causes them to stick. When the millennials or any teammate chooses their own path back, they'll be determined to be successful. They may even discover a more creative solution that you might not have thought of. So here's some great questions to use. How do you think it's going? What would it take to get you involved? What would you suggest as a solution? So here's a good one. When will you begin? And what can I do to support you? So part of this first step of reassuring is being willing to dig past the surface of their emotional response. It's so tempting. It's so tempting to respond to the emotions. Don't do it. Don't respond to the emotional response. Respond to the perceived threat that's driving the emotion. Poke around a little bit. I have learned that poor behavior usually equals heart condition. What is it your low performer might be worried about? What is it they're afraid of? Are they feeling threatened relationally, professionally, financially? What can you say or do to reassure them and to de-escalate their perceived threat? The next thing that I feel like is so important is to refuse to make people bad. Look for the breakdown in team behavior. Remember that constructive conflict is aimed at issues, actions, and processes. Destructive conflict is aimed at personal attributes, emotions, or values. You need to give me some feedback about my actions. That's fair. But I can't hear you if I feel like you're attacking me as a person rather than addressing some aspect of my performance. So rather than making the person themselves bad, look for the behaviors that are threatening the team dynamic. Is it gossip, apathy, a victim mentality? Those things can and should be addressed. But I also want to point out that you should keep in mind that chances are there are some process issues contributing to their dysfunctional responses. If you can identify and solve those, you may see the disengagement or the poor behavior patterns disappear. So the most important thing, if you haven't heard anything I've said up to this point, I want you to walk away from today believing this, that the goal is always to address poor conduct while affirming the value of the individual themselves. That person before you, no matter how badly they're struggling, that person before you is not the sum of their issues. They are defined by more than their poor choices in any given circumstance. They have inherent value, and they bring important perspectives and talents to the table. So certainly, we're not going to leave those dysfunctional behaviors unaddressed. But as you seek for solutions, it's imperative that you convey to that team member that you believe in who they are as a person, that you believe in who they are as a professional, and you value their contribution to the team. Refuse to make people bad. Rather, learn how to engage each team member at their point of struggle into the solution that you collectively seek. So we've covered number one, which is reassure. Let's go on to number two. Number two in the process after reassure is readjust your leadership approach. This really amounts to looking for ways to speak out your concerns of disengagement in a way that allows them to see how their behavior appears to others. This essentially is giving them a second chance to hear in a different way how their low performance is impacting the team and patient care. So it's this idea of being a curious guide and a coach. It's if you think about coaching, any kind of sports coaching, for instance, Some of the best coaching happens when you act like a mirror. Really great coaches in football or baseball or swimming or and gymnastics, coaches stand on the sidelines and give their players feedback so the players themselves can readjust their swing, their shot, their stroke. Readjusting your leadership approach is really this idea of being a coach on the sideline. You're not going to do the work of improving their performance for them. You're going to give them really concrete feedback so that they can readjust their performance. So let's talk about this idea of being a mirror, being a coach, standing on the sidelines. A well-known tool for this type of leadership is I see, I think, I wonder. So I see is about what you have observed, what you've experienced, what you've watched them do or say or how they behave. The I think is, what are you thinking about as a leader? What are you curious about? Like the perspective of how their behavior is affecting the team. And then I wonder, this really is a way, again, to ask a great question, to say, like, if this changed, then what would happen? It's a way of asking again to get the teammate to re-engage. So let's use an example. So perhaps you have a late adopter, a non-adopter for your morning brief or huddle. Like they're maybe late to work every day, they don't want to participate, they maybe stand close but not in the circle of a huddle or a brief, and they have their arms crossed, eyes rolling. So this is how you would use that tool. So I see that the huddle doesn't seem to be important to you. I see your eyes rolling and your arms crossed. I think that it would be worth it to explore why we do a safety huddle. Why is it important that we all get on a shared mental model before we start our day? And I'm wondering what it will take for you to join the huddle consistently every day. It's a way of framing up, similar to like we frame up things like a cuss. It's a professional way to put it out there and just be a coach and a mirror so that they can see what their behavior looks like to the rest of the team, and a way to say, as your leader, I noticed.
Okay, so readjusting your approach also involves adjusting your leadership speak into the language of your low performer or late adopter. Here's the thing. We tend to lead, and in particular to conflict manage people from the perspective of our own temperament. We issue our edicts or voice our concerns in the tone, timing, and tactic that we relate to, not necessarily in the ones that they can relate to. They're coming by their resistance, honestly. They truly can't hear you until you frame it up in a way that works for them. So it's imperative that you get to know your team. There's a lot of great tools out there to help you discover and attune to the unique way that your teammates are wired. The one in front of you, it's called the DISC. It's been around forever. Jan and I like it because it's a particularly easy grab, an easy way to kind of surf their temperament and adjust your approach in order to get them to the goal. So for example, let's say your low performer is a D on the DISC scale. Ds are the leaders on your team. If there's a performance issue that you need to address, understand that control is a big deal for this particular temperament. Ultimatums won't work for this group. You need to give them choices and just as much control over their own process as you possibly can. Or let's say your low performer is an I. People with an I temperament are influencers. You need this person engaged. But if you want that plant to bloom, you're going to have to water it with a lot of positive feedback on the front end with what they're doing well. And yes, your low performer is actually doing some things well. So find that thing, speak it out. You have to prime that pump in order for them to actually hear you when you tell them where they need to dial it up. The performance issue for an S or a C temperament likely surrounds the fact that you're disturbing what is comfortable and familiar for them. So the barge will turn with these folks, but it's going to be slow and steady that wins the day. So engage low performers in these categories with big celebrations over what may seem like to you very small wins. But remember that for them, any change feels threatening. So acknowledge their concerns, support their need to process, and affirm their contribution.
Gosh, we're going through these tools really fast. And again, it's just a framework. We're not going to be answering every question. But let's move on to our third tool and this increasingly focused approach to getting our low performer on board. It's reset. So after you've tried reassuring your employee by inviting them to rejoin the team, you've readjusted your leadership approach to get them on board, give them really a second chance to rethink, hear it in a new way. Then reset your expectations by bringing them into the current reality. What I've discovered working with some of these low performers is sometimes they don't know that they are the low performer. It's a little surprising from a leadership perspective, but it's true. Sometimes they actually don't know. Or perhaps they may believe that this new initiative or this non-gossip culture is optional, or maybe doesn't impact their role. They say this is just for this particular role, it's just for the aides, or it's just for the nurses, or whatever particular role that you're working with. Or perhaps they may believe that they are doing fine work. But some know that they're underperforming, and those are the people we need to have compassion with, and they believe it's not a big deal. Like they know they're not meeting the mark, and they think it's okay. However, we know if this low performance is left unchecked, it really spreads, tears down the team. Morale and team performance are affected. So leaders can't lead them in that spot. So as their leader, assume the best of your teammates. And sometimes this is challenging. I really encourage you to let go of past trends and really start fresh by resetting clearly the expectations. Bring that employee into the current reality of what is expected of them and their role. So review those expectations. Outline the expected behavior. Tell them what it would look like. Have them repeat it or write it down. Have them describe what they believe is the role. Have them look at and compare to the written role or what you expect. It's a way to have them own the reality of the expected behaviors. This is really important in the millennial thinker. They really, it brings them into what is my part in making the expectations and my performance match. It's really an effective way to communicate and reestablish a shared mental model on what is expected from their role and on this project. Why are we as leaders reluctant to do this? In our facility, sometimes it's because old friends don't want to point out that it's time for a change. I've worked with some of the people I've worked with for a long time, and it's hard to speak the truth and speak clear expectations, but actually your team deserves it. Perhaps it's practicing a type of leadership I call wishing and hoping, like I hope it goes away if I just let it keep going. And then the reality that this type of process, the 5 R's, it really takes time. But I really want you to think about what it will cost if you don't do it. Mm-hmm. So it's too expensive to let this go unchecked without re-clarifying your expectations. For instance, I worked with a new employee that came to our facility years ago, and they were late to work. And so I asked some great questions about that, and really what they thought was late to work was they walked in at 7 and they began to get changed for work into scrubs. But here at this facility, being ready at 7 meant you were changed, had a pen in your hand, and were standing at the desk. So resetting the expectations is just to clarify what do we do here and what is expected of you. So this is called reality leading. Of course, Cy Wakeman has framed this up in a couple of really good books. She says that leaders have the right and responsibility to insist on accountability, but individuals ultimately decide to step up or not. This resetting expectations as a leader is your job and your responsibility to really make clear where the bar is so they can hit the bar. But you are not in control of whether individuals ultimately decide whether or not to step up. It's really a challenge for a lot of leaders to ask people to step up, step in. It's really this going back to the invitation to rise to the bar that is set. So I think as leaders, sometimes we get stuck in this around our own fear about what if they quit? Or what if they don't like me? What if they still don't meet the expectations and they're trying? So it's also true if the leaders don't draw a line somewhere, that this low performer will drag the team down. We should also ask, what if they stay? What if nothing changes because I don't hold them accountable? What is the real cost then? We really need to set as a priority of this idea of declaring what the expectation is so that the employee can be successful, but also to protect the team from what happens if you don't.
Okay, so moving on from resetting their expectation, we're going to move into redeploy. Redeploy into their area of strength. What you see before you is probably one of my favorite quotes of all time. Albert Einstein said, "Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid." If readjusting your approach and resetting the expectation fails you, perhaps it's time to ask if your low performer could simply be miscast. So as we mentioned in the introduction, maybe their lack of engagement is a reflection of square peg, round hole. Perhaps you're asking them to fulfill a role that's completely counterculture to who they are, back to their temperament. Are they in a position or a role that's going to set them up for success, or are they in one that constantly showcases where they can't quite make the curve? Can you reassign roles and responsibilities? Is there a position within your department or organization that they might be better suited for? Perhaps their role has simply outgrown their skill set, and they need to redeploy into an area where their strength can shine. Now, I know this gets tricky, particularly if you're dealing with contracted employees like nurses, for example. But chances are they know they're not engaged or performing, and let's face it, that's just not a happy way to live. So the tool of I see, I think, I wonder would be a great one to utilize in this type of discussion as well. The goal is to get them to self-discover that their current frame of mind or performance standard isn't working for them any more than it's working for you. So help them to self-assess where their strengths and weaknesses lie. Engage them in imagining more for themselves. What would it look like for them to play in their areas of strength? How can you assist them in finding the place where they can fit and fly and begin to believe in themselves again?
So I noticed a question in the chat box Connie put in. Thank you, Connie. About she asked, how do you deal with a low performer that thinks they are being retaliated against because the leader you're addressing their work behavior? I think it's an important thing to recognize that as we move to the last two boxes, which are, well, last three boxes, reset, redeploy, and release, it makes employees very uncomfortable that they are self-discovering, that they're not meeting the mark, and maybe they go into their victim mentality. Like Rhonda was talking about before, this process of low performance produces a lot of emotions. Don't be steered off course by their continued bad or maybe accelerated bad behavior. In response to you holding them accountable, the team is worth it to keep marching down the 5 R's. Really hang in there and work through the process with them, because eventually that low performer may land up in this 5th category, which is released for success elsewhere. So you've worked through the 5 R's, you've worked from top to bottom, and here you are at the place that no leader wants to be, is where you've done all this work with them and they are still not successful on coming on board. And maybe they've even had an accelerated bad performance or bad emotions around being held into accountable. Hold the line, leaders. Be brave. Be really courageous. Our patient safety and our team needs you to just keep marching through. And step 5 is release for success elsewhere. You really hope that your valued human on your team can find a new place to be successful. Some of the employees that I worked with over the years that have become low performers, and they've had to be released, over the long haul, I've really discovered that they found success elsewhere. That not being successful on your team doesn't mean that they are bad. It just means that they don't fit in this place. So we owe it to the rest of the team, because that team, your team, the bulk of your team, your high performers and your average performers, they really deserve the ability to fly as high as possible, and so that requires you to release this employee. My goal as a leader is to help people leave the organization whole and with dignity. This is really challenging. It takes a lot of patience and grace and extending. If they're not succeeding in their current position, it's really the caring, healthy leadership behavior to help them to a place where they can be successful. It's in that way of keeping their humanity and their dignity and their value to the planet intact as you say, well, this is interesting, but this isn't a match for what we need from you, or this organization needs, or this team needs. And I believe that you have something to offer, and I don't think it's here. That's a really difficult conversation, but I really want you to be confident at the end of this that you've done everything you can to help them be successful in your organization. But to be honest, not everybody makes the curve. And you notice when you release this person how high your team will fly without dragging someone along behind them. So I want to just kind of paint a picture of how this works by telling you a quick story. So this is just an example of, that kind of demonstrates why application of a framework like the 5 R's is so important if you're dealing with a low performer. So years ago, I was on shift during a particularly busy day, and in her haste, one of the nurses I was working with didn't do the required cross-check on a particular medication. And unfortunately, she ended up overdosing the patient with 10 times the medication that he should have received. So what should have been a simple sedation turned into a sentinel event, and the patient had to be shipped to a higher level of care. So ultimately, the patient ended up with a positive outcome, but it was a devastating mistake for the family, for the nurse who committed the error, and as someone who was on shift that day, I can tell you it was a devastating mistake for the entire team. Now, this nurse definitely made some choices that contributed to her personal performance failure that day, but in my mind, this was not a single nurse failure. This was a team failure. That's because we knew this low performer was in trouble long before this particular event occurred, and we had failed to use the 5 R's to coach her to a place of success.
In their review, the Board of Nursing made a statement that deeply impacted me. They said, why do we let a teammate get to the point of failure before we intervene to redeploy? The kind and caring thing to do would have been to have been honest with her long before that day and to have engaged her in the process of self-evaluation with the 5 R's. She would have either gotten the help she needed to re-engage or self-selected out into a better fit for her. So remember that we certainly know it's a challenge. So I want to drive it back to one of the key principles that we started with, which is any threat to the team dynamic is a threat to patient safety. And at the end of the day, we are in healthcare, and patient safety is our utmost priority. So, do we want to value every single player? Absolutely. Be creative. Maybe once you have moved through that process of reassuring them, re-inviting them back into a place of playing on the team, once you've kind of readjusted your approach to make sure that they can hear you, once you've reset the expectations, meaning you've given them all the information, including the feedback that they need in order to be successful, and then be creative about how you redeploy that person. So, for example, in my unit, we had a nurse who was getting closer to the edge of retirement. Her speed just wasn't quite keeping up. And so one of the creative ways we redeployed was to make sure that she got the critical, one-to-one patients, while the rest of us were spinning 7 or 8 other referrals. But it was a recipe for success that made her feel valued as a player, but redeployed her into a place where her strengths could shine. And then this release, again, sometimes it is the kind and caring thing to do, but we're going to do everything in our power to help them be successful right where they're at. And if not, we're going to release them with that deep knowing that who they are as a person is valuable, what they have to contribute is important, and we release them feeling whole.
To do this process of the 5 R takes a lot of courage as leaders. It takes a lot of intentionality, and I want to recommend that you don't do it alone. Find another leader who's maybe perhaps more experienced than you are, that it will be confidential, maybe it's your own boss, to help keep you accountable and help keep your compass at true north as you work through this process with a low performer. The low performers, I guarantee you, will react and respond, and it may not be very pretty. So partner up with another leader who's got experience in this so that you can talk it over. Definitely partner up with human resources, because they will help you keep it according to contract or your own organization method of accountability, whether it's just culture or the process that you have in place at your organization. But you really do need a partner, especially when you get down to the last 3 R's. Make sure that you are not flying alone on this. Healthcare is a team sport, and we're really counting on the whole of the team, including the low performer, to bring our teams up to what our patients deserve. So we hope that you've enjoyed this framework. It's just a framework. It's just a start. There's so much more to talk about this, but we hope that you've enjoyed looking at the 5 R's and maybe giving you a way to self-reflect about where am I on this process of holding my employee into account, or where is the employee in this process? Where do I need to go next step? So we close with this photo of the mountains that we live below here. This is Mount Hood on a wintry day, and Chris, we'll pass it over to you for Q&A.
Thank you both. That was really, really wonderful. That really hitting home that point that patient safety and the care people receive is really affected by these low performers, and it's important to bring them up because of everything you said. I could imagine that, going through this process really helps everybody else on the team too. That's not one of the low performers. It has to improve employee satisfaction and retention, because you're not dealing potentially with those people that are dragging everybody back. So that,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I want to mention is that why accountability is so important. And yes, use tools like Just Culture out there. Using that algorithm will help make sure that you're, again, refusing to make people bad, that you're actually looking for the process issues that need to be addressed. But, oh my gosh, I just totally... I'm sure it was going to be profound. Oh, I remember. Sorry. So accountability. So you mentioned, Chris, about how it affects the other people on the team. So if you as a leader don't address accountability with your low performer, for the whole team, that breaks down trust in both you as a leader and in the process. So we've got to hold people accountable in order to preserve trust in the team, in both leadership and the process. But we can do that in a way, again, that preserves the value of the person themselves in the same way that we're striving to preserve team synergy.
That's great. Do you recommend then using something like Just Culture? That's in the early stages? That was a question from a few people.
I would really start with the first two. Sometimes we go in, because of our own pressure as leaders, we go into this place of modified panic, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to deal with this? Or maybe you have your own emotions around their behaviors or lack thereof.
Right.
But I really give people an opportunity to self-discover first. Ask great questions. Just start with some great questions. Just take a moment and help them self-reflect so that they can get back on board the easiest pathway. When you sit down with an employee with a Just Culture algorithm, it really will build a wall. And you don't want to do that until you actually need to get into some corrective steps, which would be more about the last 3 steps in the 5 R's.
Got it. What do you do with the folks that are, let's say you don't have issues of low performers, but you have a lot of people here that are average. Somebody in their pre-webinar questions said, people who just do their job but barely. They're kind of renters but not owners, so they're not doing anything that's making them a low performer, but they're just kind of meh, Can you use the 5 R's with those people too?
Absolutely. So what I've discovered with those folks, I love that you're renters, not owners. I might just feel that. That's brilliant. So with the renters, there'll always be a percentage of people on your team that are in a personal crisis, a family issue, a health issue, something like that. And they need to be allowed to be renters for a time and then re-invited back onto the team. But let's pretend that this is somebody who just has camped there and now has an address at the renter apartment. That's where by asking great questions and inviting them into the process, maybe finding out what their strength is so that you can get a project or a piece of the work that captures their imagination and it casts the vision that they have potential for more. Like, I see this in you. Have you ever thought about taking it to this next level? Like, gosh, you're really good at talking with the grieving patient. Okay, have you ever thought, here's this training, I think you'd be good at it. Like, cast the vision for more for them. They may not be in that place where they can envision themselves performing higher. Give everybody an opportunity to grow and speak it out.
And I think, too, just tapping, tailoring onto the end to that, there's such great resources out there on strength-based training and trying to get people deployed into the area of their strength. So you saw from the pictures that Jan and I had here that we live in a recreational area. So my department, for example, has an awful lot of people that they don't live to work, they work to live. They're here to recreate and such. But if you can tap into, what I have found is if I can tap into what is it that makes them feel strong, where are the areas that they shine, how do I get them engaged in something that is of particular interest or is a particular strength for them, and then they'll kind of change their paradigm, into something where they want to actually engage more for the sake of the team.
Good deal. So what do we do then when we're dealing perhaps with a problematic leader? Is there any way this could be used for the, what do we call it, managing up, or, have you ever used the 5 R's in that way, or do you have other advice?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So it's so challenging to lead up, to lead north.
Right.
But it's also really important because human factors affect leaders too. Like, when did they start getting disengaged? What was it that tipped them over? Did their job outgrow their skill? Like, when did they disconnect? I have done the 5 R's with many leaders, and some just were in that stuck place and needed confidential conversation where they felt safe to explore that. Like, some great questions, and to say, gosh, I've noticed this. I think, I wonder. I see that your leadership style is different. I think something's changed. Can you tell me more about that? I'm wondering what it would take to bring you back to the leader I used to know. Or, there's lots of ways of bringing up truth, but it's really just addressing the human factor in the leader. And I suspect that any good leader notices that they aren't as effective as other leaders. I've had leaders make the curve, and I've had leaders who then self-selected off a team that they were failing in. But it's very challenging. It takes a lot of courage. But I really believe that people are worth it, and leadership is lonely. And so it's worth investing up into the leader to help them be the best leader, because it will change the whole department. And if that isn't possible, then find out who the situational leaders on your team are, and then invest into their leadership. Lean in, speak out. I see this in you, because the team itself can rise higher, not as high as they would with a functional leader, but they can rise quite high if you just pour into the situational leaders as well. So that's what I've done in the past. Yeah.
Engagement is catching, whether it comes from below or above.
Right. Yeah.
So that's really interesting, I think, because you're not going to be able to release the leader. So you've got to
that's
find.
not part of your job. No.
Yeah.
If it's dangerous, or if it's really spiraling down, then you can invite them into a conversation after you've done the 5 R's with them. You can't release. That's not your job description, but you can say, have you considered talking to your boss? This might be a good conversation to look at. Do you mind if I go with you? Or, whatever partnership. Be a partner with your leader. Failing leaders are discouraged too.
Yeah.
And it's just a reality. It's just human factors.
I don't know what we could do about this, but there's a good question here, I feel, that's in the chat about what do you do if you've gone through this process and you're working with someone, but HR is reluctant to get on board with what you're doing?
Wow.
Have you run into that before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, this gets tricky, right? Because, for example, sometimes you're dealing with contractual employees, and, HR always wants to make sure that they're following the contract. And it kind of goes back to what Jan said again. As leaders, we're hesitant. We're hesitant to pull that final lever. And HR sometimes is that final, lever pulling place. So what can you do? I think it's a matter of just continuing the conversation. And I know that that gets frustrating if you feel like you're beating a dead horse there, but really you have no other option than to say, what is within my power? What are some things, what are the things that I can control, that I can do? And so coming back, if you've got HR that just kind of refuses to pull the lever with this particular teammate, again, if you've got great documentation, that is absolutely key. You've got to have the documentation that shows that there are actual performance issues, right? Actual actions or behaviors that are creating an unsafe environment either for the patient or for the team, right? So you bring those forward, and hopefully the safety word gets your HR folks, you know, and you say, hey, this has turned into a patient safety issue. How can you argue with that?
Right.
But again, if that process is taking longer than you want it to, just continue to engage with your employee themselves, to keep them in the conversation with the first 4 R's, doing your very best just to help them. Again, they probably know that they're not succeeding, that they're not engaged. So again, having those critical conversations, those crucial conversations to help them self-assess so that they can either decide to re-engage, or a lot of times they will self-select out.
So really the approach with HR is to become a broken record and to increase the face-to-face time you have. So it starts with an email, hey, I'm concerned about this employee, can you, I'm starting the process. And then you walk up to their office, and then you make an appointment and sit in their office, and then you bring the documentation in triplicate and you sit in their office. And then I'm not kidding, I'm really so dedicated to team function and team morale and its effect on patient safety that I just increase, maybe I have my boss come with me, HR, I just increase the stakes every time. I march that thing up and make it feel more and more important to HR. It takes effort, but gosh, when you release someone, the team flies higher. They're so relieved, and morale jumps, performance increases. It's worth it to do the work on with your teammates in HR. Make friends in HR before you start to have the send them cookies. I don't know.
That seems that's a very good advice, I feel. Well, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to bounce. We got a couple more minutes here. I feel, one question that I saw that might have been a little interesting is, and I don't know if there's probably not a direct answer to this, but what is the normal timeline of this process? Like, how much energy are you putting towards this? How much energy is getting taken away from, you as a manager looking towards your high performers and your kind of normal performers? It almost reminds me of the discussion of a classroom, right? Where, maybe the low performers get all of the activity and attention of the teacher, and the higher performers then start acting up because they're not getting the attention.
That's exactly right. And that's why there's really phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1, you lean full on in to the high performers and get your momentum going. You kind of think of, I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but it's really like a barking dog, the low performer. Like, that's not the first place you put your attention. Put it on the 80% that are like excited and moving forward. Put your attention there until they get their momentum. So when is that? I don't know. Each project is a little bit different, but really put the bulk of your time and attention into the high performers, average performers, to get them going. And then go back and mop up. But I think a good rule of thumb, of course it's so individual, but 80-20, maybe, 80% of your time and attention should be towards the people doing the work effectively, efficiently. And then to go back and just methodically go and kind of bring the low performer forward. And then once they get into the swim of things with the high performer, average performer, momentum will carry them and finish it. And then the time and attention it takes to help someone get released is totally worth it. So you got to do that work. But That's just the methodical, brave, courageous work of leadership. But 80% of your time and attention should be in those top performers.
And also with that time that you're dedicating to your low performer, yes, it's going to be longer than you want it to be.
Oh, yeah.
So that's just kind of a given. And so again, spend your 80% first, but recognize that 20% is probably going to take a little more time and effort than you want to give. But that's where we encourage you, again, to say, this person in front of me is worth it. This person in front of me is a valuable contributor to the team, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make them feel affirmed and valuable. And as I do that, hopefully they'll raise up to hit the bar that you are creating for themselves to see how wonderful that they really can be. But it will take a little more time and effort than you probably want, and that's okay. Tell yourself that that individual is worth it and the team dynamic is worth it because your patients are worth it.
That is a great way to end this, I think. Thank you both for the great presentation on this. Everybody that's joined, both Jan and Rhonda's email addresses are on screen right now, so feel free, if your question wasn't answered, to shoot them a message. You'll be receiving, everybody, an evaluation shortly. So that evaluation, we love it if you fill that out. It'll be in your email. It really does help us, and it really helps the speakers as well. And please stay in touch with us and head on over to our website to learn about all that we offer. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The conference has now concluded. You may disconnect your phone lines. Thank you.